Wait, stop the show. Stop the show. Apparently negotiations at the United Nations have been successful, and Jane McNair, God love her, she has relinquished control of the Civic Media Network. If you haven't been listening for the last 5 minutes, it has been McNair on the air promos, one after another, and apparently she was holding out for a new sports car. And apparently now the powers that be have given Jane the new sports car.
Or at least a fruit plate.
Or at least a fruit plate. And Jane has relinquished her control. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we can start the show.
Yeah, let's try that again.
Live from the Civic Media World Headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin, it's the Todd Albaugh Show. And now, pursuing truth wherever it may lead, here's your host, Todd Albaugh.
Across Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network and streaming worldwide on the Civic Media app. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Todd Albaugh, along with our producer and engineer, Mr. Aaron Zommers, over on the board. It is 7 minutes now past the hour of 12 noon on Thursday, February 8th, 2024. I'm still happy that Jane, found in her heart to let the network go.
Yeah, me too.
We're like, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there was a gremlin in the system, obviously, is what happened. And it just kept playing a McNair on-air promos over and over. I told Zommers, I said, are we gonna be able to start the show here? But it all worked out. We were able to get on it. But it's a great reminder, of course, that you can listen to Matt Nair on air every day from 10 until noon. It precedes our show. And most days, Jane's okay with us starting our show, but she just wanted to make sure she got her fruit plate. And
yeah, I can't blame her. She has been asking for that fruit plate, like just a daily or weekly fruit plate for probably a year.
I find it a very reasonable request, by the way. So, and she's a lovely person, and she deserves a fruit plate.
I personally wouldn't hold up a radio network for a fruit plate, but to each their own.
To each their own. You're exactly right, Mr. Zommers. Well, welcome in. It's a great day to have you along here. It is a bit cloudy high atop State Street to block off the Capitol Square here in Madison. But boy, howdy, the old groundhog was right. He has predicted an early spring. It'll be in the 50s today. And Mr. Zommers, I believe the phones are ringing there. This is fantastic. The groundhog was correct. And so it's highs in the 50s. They're saying here in south central Wisconsin, in the Dane County area, there is actually a slight risk for a tornado. If the sun comes out and we heat up into the mid-50s, there is a slight tornado risk. And watching last night, the meteorologists here in Madison, you could tell, they were very excited about this because there's never been a tornado in February. So from a meteorological standpoint, they're very excited. There is a risk of a tornado for the first time in south central Wisconsin.
Also kind of terrifying, climate change and all that.
Well, you could tell they didn't want anybody to be hurt. You understand?
Right.
They just thought, well, wouldn't this be cool? Speaking of a force to be reckoned with, on the air, our friend and colleague live from Waukesha, host of Matt Nair on air herself, after relinquishing control of the network a few moments ago, fresh off her victory, Jane McNair. Jane, thanks for calling in and thanks for releasing the network.
Well, Todd, I guess I'm kind of upset that my plan for complete and total global domination has been uncovered. I thought I was going to be able to keep that going kind of under the radar for a little bit until, I had exerted complete dominance. That's fine. I'll just have to, work a little harder.
Did you hear that?
Greg and I were doing a post-mortem, and all of a sudden I'm hearing myself, and then I'm hearing myself again.
And again.
And then I hear, and then
again.
Is that me again? And gosh, she's good. They just keep running her. Who is that? No, I'm kidding.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I had to call in and just say, I'm handing it over to you, Todd.
All right.
I trust you and Aaron. I know you will continue our our efforts for total and complete global domination.
Well, I appreciate that. We appreciate your thoughtfulness. And by the way, while I have you on the line, because I was going to kind of pick up a little bit where you and Greg left off, or at least earlier in your show, as I was listening earlier. And of course, we're following the hot news story out of Washington today, the U.S. Supreme Court hearing this case on whether or not they're going to uphold the Colorado ruling, which says that former President Trump is ineligible. And we're going to talk about this 14th Amendment here in just a little bit. I want your take on this because I haven't talked a lot about this or the state Supreme Court cases, the maps, because I just think once it's in the courts, they're not supposed to listen to people lobbying them. I just want the rule of law applied. That's kind of my take. What's yours?
I would absolutely agree with you, Todd. I think, and as you mentioned, Greg and I talked about that earlier this morning, the language is so murky. And from what I was following as the show was going on, is now we have to determine whether what they're trying to decide whether what happened on January 6th, whether it was a riot or an insurrection.
Right.
And it's those kinds of nuanced arguments that I think are so, they make your eyes cross after a while. It's like, but ultimately, I do not think that the Supremes are going to go with the Colorado plaintiffs. I just don't. I just don't.
I agree with you.
And especially when you consider the makeup of our current Supreme Court, whether or not the case brought by the defendants or the plaintiffs in Colorado carries weight. I wish I were a lawyer, but and as we talked about too, Todd, I think there is concern that his supporters, Donald Trump supporters, and there are many, many of them, if they remove him from ballots, that is just going to feed into this is a whole deep state thing in order to remove our choices and all of that. And I don't think that's going to be helpful. I think what we need in November is an undisputable victory by the numbers.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, yes, there would be, I'm sure, my guess is there would be actual rioting in the street if Trump was kept off the ballot by the Supreme Court. But again, I honestly don't think that should even be in consideration by the Supreme Court. I just want them to do a literal interpretation. People who have gone to law school at high levels and who have been in the judicial system a long time, just apply the law as it should be. And whatever that outcome is, I'm okay with that. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Todd. If only we could all agree that when something is decided, I don't know, like an election, that the results are acceptable.
Yeah. Look at this. Somebody's calling into my cell phone right now from Oregon. It wouldn't be. I don't know who it is. Wouldn't it be fantastic if I answered it on air? But they might swear, and so I probably shouldn't.
Yeah, don't do that.
You've been in the business a long time. Have you ever done that? Just like taking a call like that, and then. Ben, why did I do that? Because the people just went crazy.
Yeah, don't do that.
Also, off the text line from Maine about the Jane McNair promo after promo after promo earlier, and my accusation that she was holding out for a fruit plate. Andrew from Maine, Jane, says, glad you were able to find Jane a fruit plate. And also your colleague from your show, our own Greg Bach, says, we shall defend our hallowed grounds and never give up this ship. So there you go.
We're not going anywhere, Todd Alba. You can try.
I'm thrilled for that. It's great to have you guys leading in every day. And look, I've been running this up the flagpole here around the headquarters, and I'm feeling like this Jane and Todd tour of particularly Western Wisconsin is getting closer to be a done thing. We'll have more details later for our audience. But Jane and I are going to hit the road, and I'll promise you one thing, my friend. We're not missing Amory.
Oh, we are totally going to Amory. We are absolutely going to my favorite place I've never been. And I'm very, very excited about that. And the opportunity to go out on the road with you, we will have a ball. We will just have it'll be a great time.
Well, you're a fantastic person and a fantastic host every morning from 10 until noon. Matt Nair on air. Jay Matt Nair, thanks for calling in, and thanks for letting us continue today.
Thank you, my friends. Be well. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. Jane Matnair, host of Matnair On Air. That was fantastic. Sometimes, and that's the great thing about live radio, is that that's one of the things I truly love, is that you never know what's going to happen, and you just got to roll with it. And sometimes, like that, something you didn't expect, it just turns out to be a heck of a lot of fun, thanks in part to our friend Jane.
At least for us. Fun.
Right.
Fun. Engineering's figuring it out.
I'll keep people on their toes, Anyway, thank you, Jane, for calling in. We appreciate it. That is where we are going to start in all seriousness, with this Supreme Court session this morning, now going into the afternoon in Washington, D.C. Reports are that the arguments are wrapping up in this Trump ballot case. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to come back, and I'm actually going to kind of dissect the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and talk about that a little bit, because as I said, I don't believe in lobbying the courts. The courts are supposed to be a separate but equal branch of government. You have the executive, either a governor or the president. You have the legislative, which is, in our case, the state legislature in Wisconsin or the federal Congress. And then you have the judicial branch, either the state Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court. And once an issue gets to the Supremes, either the state or the federal, if they're doing their job as the founders intended, they shouldn't be listening or be affected by outside lobbying interests. And of course, this is another bottle of wine or a cup of coffee, but that's where a lot of this concern over Clarence Thomas and others comes in, is the fact that they've accepted so much money and so many gifts that how can you help but be affected by outside influences? So I'm not all into lobbying the Supreme Court. I just don't think it's right. But what I am into is breaking down and for us to understand why a court might decide something. So we're going to come back and talk about that. Also, Nikki Haley on the campaign trail. She was campaigning last night. And again, I'll give Nikki Haley some props here. She's at least calling things the way she sees them. And on this one, I agree with her. She's telling people exactly what the Republican Party is today. We're going to hear from Nikki Haley on the other side. Also, we have former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois. A guy who's been there, who understands Congress and understands the party. He has a very simple way to get Congress to pass Ukrainian aid. Of course, that is at risk right now, along with aid to Israel. That's breaking in Congress as well. So we're going to come back and talk about all that. Take your phone calls as well on this now starting to rain here in Madison on a Thursday afternoon, the 8th of February, 2024. It's the Todd Albaugh Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. The Todd Albaugh Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. It is now 20 past the hour of 12 noon. Glad to have you back, Mr. Zommers. Give us a report here on the music selection.
So Jeff Perry said, "You keep talking about the Supremes. Is Diana Ross somehow involved in all of this?"
That was the Supremes and Diana Ross, right? Diana Ross.
Yes.
Verstappen. Great song, by the way. I love the fact that Jane mentioned the Supremes, called them the Supremes. There, as you know, Mr. Zommers knows, and some regular listeners of this show, I was a huge fan of the ABC series back in the mid-2000s called Boston Legal with William Shatner. Yes, that William Shatner, Captain Kirk, played Denny Crane, the matriarch of the legal firm Crane, Poole, and Schmidt. And so it won, I think it was a season finale for one of the seasons. The Denny Crane and one of the other people in the law firm, Alan Shore, played by James Spader, went and argued a case before the Supreme Court, and they referred to them as the Supremes. So anyway, we are talking about the real court here, pardon me, and glad to have you along on a Thursday. Arguments are wrapping up Perhaps they already have wrapped up now in the Supreme Court at this hour on this case on whether or not former President Trump is eligible to run again on the ballot. So I want to kind of set this up, and we're going to break this down in terms of the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This is from NBC News after what happened in Colorado earlier this year. It said former President Donald Trump is ineligible to appear on Colorado's primary ballot next year based on constitutional grounds, the state Supreme Court ruled on Tuesday. And again, this was from December of last year. The judges wrote that Trump cannot appear on the ballot because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. It goes on to say and talk about this. It says the provision was mainly used between its ratification in the aftermath of the Civil War and the 1872 enactment of the Amnesty Act, according to a Congressional Research Service report. I worked for a member of Congress for about 5 years, former Congressman Scott Klug of Madison. Spent a lot of the time, for most of my time, I was running the Madison office, the Wisconsin office, but it worked out in D.C., on average, maybe once every other month for about a week or so. So I worked out at the U.S. Capitol some in our office there. Great city, great place to work. Very honored to have done so. But the Congressional Research Service, CRS, it is a great governmental body, and these people are not, well, I'm sure they have personal opinions, but it is not a partisan part of Congress. It's kind of like here in Wisconsin, you have the Legislative Research Service, or you have the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. And certainly those people have private thoughts, right, or ideas. But the institution itself is fiercely nonpartisan and simply there to serve the institution and to serve the people. So the Congressional Research Service is one of these great places out within our government in Washington, D.C. So they wrote this paper called The Insurrection Bar to Office, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This says, I'm going to read verbatim here, then we can discuss it. In the aftermath of the events of January 6, 2021, in and around the U.S. Capitol, there have been calls for accountability for those who participated, as well as those who may have helped instigate it. The breach of the Capitol resulted in numerous injuries, multiple deaths, and significant property damage. It also delayed Congress's constitutional duty of certifying electoral votes for President-elect Joseph Biden and caused Capitol Police and other law enforcement personnel to evacuate the vice president and members of Congress from the House and Senate floors to safer locations. Some observers, historians, and other commentators are wondering whether the disqualification clause of the 14th Amendment might provide a mechanism to disqualify individuals who participated in or encouraged the siege, including former and sitting government officials, from holding office. And again, this is not a news story I'm reading. This is from the Congressional Research Service, a nonpartisan part of the federal government, written by attorneys. Invocation, I'm reading on here from the Congressional Research Service paper. Invocation of the disqualification clause raises a number of novel legal questions involving the activities that could trigger disqualification. Keyword could. The offices to which disqualification might apply and the mechanisms to enforce disqualification. The clause has been seldom used, and the few times it has been used in the past mainly arose out of the Civil War, a very different context from the events of January 6. It is therefore unclear to what extent historical precedents provide useful guidance for its application to the events of J6. This legal sidebar describes the disqualification clause, explains to whom it might apply, and what activities could incur a bar on holding office, and discusses possible mechanisms to implement it. So I'm not going to read the entire thing. It's several pages long here, but I want to hit a couple of these highlights because, again, I'm not an attorney. I worked for an attorney. I worked in a law firm for a time. I spent time working for the U.S. House of Representatives, but that doesn't make me an attorney, let alone a legal scholar. And again, my stance on this is not what my opinion is or anyone else's. It should be, in my opinion, that the 9 Supreme Court justices should apply this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment using their legal expertise and simply apply the law. And if that means that Trump is disqualified according to the Constitution, then he's disqualified. If it means he's not, then he's not. I just want justice to be served. So it goes on here, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and this again from the Congressional Research Service. No person shall be senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, as an officer of the United States, or a member of the state legislature, or an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So the important part there is that 2/3 of either the Senate or the House could say, well, it doesn't really matter if this applies or not, we're going to overrule it. Well, because of the split in Congress, of course, that's not going to happen. So we're going to come back and we're going to read a little bit more on this, going to pick this apart a little bit, because I think it's important for all the prognostication, kind of, the political version of groundhogs, all the political prognostication. It really comes down to what the law says, and then how the 9 people on the Supreme Court apply it. And it sounds like, for people who are in the room, reporters who are in the room today, it sounds like that the majority of justices are not buying this. That they're basically saying, this is really a stretch here to say that Trump isn't qualified. Looks like it's probably going to go in Trump's favor, just from what we're hearing. But we'll come back and discuss it more on the other side. Take your phone calls as well. This is the Todd Allball Show for a Thursday on the Civic Media Radio Network. Pursuing truth wherever it may lead and having fun doing it. Welcome back to the Todd Allball Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. Glad to have you along with us on a Thursday, February 8th, 34 minutes now past the hour of 12 noon here in Madison, Wisconsin, where we can report to you that the sun must be a rainbow somewhere. It's kind of still raining, but their clouds have parted somewhere. There's also sun at the same time. And this, in all seriousness, Mr. Zommers, is what meteorologists here, at least in south central Wisconsin, were concerned about, that this might happen. The sun would come out about this time, and temperature is just going to keep on going up. And in all seriousness, there could be some severe weather in parts of south central Wisconsin, and there is a slight risk of a tornado.
Yeah, I remember seeing that yesterday on the local news that I watched with my roommate again,
Yes.
and talking about a potential for really bad rainstorms in that south central Wisconsin area today and tomorrow.
48 degrees right now here in Madison, and now that the sun's come out, this is what they're saying, that if we get to around, I think the record high for the date was 55 degrees. If we get up towards that, could generate some heavier storms, certainly some heavier rain. So if you're traveling throughout, particularly south central Wisconsin today, do so carefully, as kind of a wacky weather here for a February. We are talking about the breaking news, or at least the latest news out of Washington, D.C. today. That is, the United States Supreme Court is wrapping up arguments right now, hearing arguments from both sides over this case from Colorado, in which last year the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that former President Trump is ineligible to be on the ballot there due to his actions around January 6th. And breaking down, they use Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And again, I'm not an attorney. I did work for a law firm for a while, and also spent 5 years working for a member of Congress in the House of Representatives. But I don't claim to be a legal scholar. And my point of view on this is no one should be lobbying the Supreme Court. the 9 members of the Supreme Court should apply the law and the Constitution as it's written and do it fairly and evenly. And whatever the result is when you do it, apply the law, that's what it should be. But I think it's important for us as citizens to try to break this down and understand what truth from fiction. So how did this all come about? According to a story at NBC News in early September, several law firms and the Citizen for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, as they're called, filed a lawsuit on behalf of 6 voters in Colorado requesting that Trump be barred from the state's 2024 election ballots because of his role in the insurrection on January 6, 2021. The group noted that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has, quote, not been tested often in the last 150 years due to lack of insurrections, unquote. So as it turns out, if you don't have an insurrection, you can't test this out. We've just, I love that language. As it turns out, we've had a lack of insurrections in the last 150 years. Haven't had a lot until you get Trump.
Yeah, it's like, our first aid supplies are pretty old because we've had a lack of bullet holes.
Right. So this group in Colorado said, however, that it represented New Mexico residents last year who sued to remove Cowboys from Trump co-founder Couy Griffin from his elected position as a county commissioner, which was, quote, the only successful case to be brought under Section 3 since 1869. I didn't even know there was a group called Cowboys for Trump. And the co-founder's name is Couy Griffin. Oh, Couy Griffin. He's founder of the Cowboys for Trump.
When I hear the name Cowboys for Trump, it just makes me think like they are the new cast for Brokeback Mountain. I don't know why, but something about that, it just seems very...
Well, what I say to that? Save a horse, ride a cowboy.
There we go.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, let's get back on track here. So this, again, is from the Congressional Research Service. And they're a nonpartisan group within Congress, within the legislature, attorneys here, and they're breaking this down in this paper. So this is what the Congressional Research Service says. In short, Section 3 disqualification appears to apply to any covered person who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and thereafter either 1, engages in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or 2, gives aid or comfort to the enemies of the United States, unless a supermajority of Congress removes such disability. So if you apply that and say, okay, well, did Trump engage in insurrection or give aid and comfort? Well, of course, the January 6th committee, the bipartisan committee, already has found that Trump not only encouraged, but was responsible for the actions of January 6th. Now back to this Congressional Research Service paper. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was enacted in the aftermath of the Civil War. Section 3 seems specifically designed for the Reconstruction era, but may be applied to modern times as well. Section 3 was, for the most part, only used for the short period between its ratification of the 1872 enactment of the Amnesty Act. The Amnesty Act removed the disqualification from most Confederates and their sympathizers and was enacted by a 2/3 majority of Congress in accordance with the terms of Section 3. So basically what it's saying there is that if you would have applied Section 3 of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, you would have had to say, well, no Southern state, no part of the Confederacy, almost none, none of those people are qualified to hold state legislative office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So they carved out this clause saying that if a supermajority of Congress removes the disability, they can still do it. So again, Lincoln, being the greatest president in American history, in my opinion, malice toward none, charity for all. Remember that line in his second inaugural address? He said, look, we can't just be mad at each other. We're never going to move forward. So as terrible as this thing is, we have to forgive and move on. So under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and then they had the supermajority of Congress at the time, post-Civil War, said, look, we're going to give all these Southern people a pass so that we can move on and actually have elected officials. Reading on from the Congressional Research paper here, it says, some argue the Amnesty Act operates retrospectively. In a recent case, this was Cawthorn versus Amaflea, it was discussed in this legal sidebar. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit found that the act does not apply to later insurrections or treasonous acts. So this might be something, we're getting into the legal weeds here. I understand that. But I think in this case, we have to a little bit because we can all posture and give our opinion. This is why I love the law. It comes down to what the law says. So a court of appeals in the Fourth Circuit found that this really doesn't apply to current times. But now it's going to be up to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, to figure this out. Back to this paper from the Congressional Research Service. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not expressly require a criminal conviction, and historically, one was not necessary. Reconstruction-era federal prosecutors brought civil actions in court to oust officials linked to the Confederacy, and Congress, in some cases, took action to refuse to seat members. Congress last used Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in 1919 to refuse to seat a socialist congressman accused of having given aid and comfort to Germany during the First World War. Irrespective of the Amnesty Act, the congressman, Victor Berger, was eventually seated at a subsequent Congress after the U.S. Supreme Court threw out his espionage conviction for judicial bias. Recently, various groups and organizations have challenged the eligibility of certain candidates running for Congress, accusing that the candidates' alleged involvement in the events surrounding January 6th breach of the Capitol render them ineligible for office. So this, and I want to make clear, this has not happened. But what they're saying here is you can take a guy like Derek Van Orton, congressman from the 3rd District, and say, look, he posted on his Facebook page that he was there, he bragged about it, and therefore that makes him ineligible. Well, it's saying here that, whether that applies or not, we don't know. No challenges have, to date, resulted in the disqualification of any congressional congressman or candidate. A New Mexico state court, however, has removed a county commissioner, this Couey Griffin, from office and prohibited from seeking or holding office in a future time because he was part of the J6 insurrection. So I think this is really interesting to me because if you dig down here, you see that it's not cut and dried. As the Congressional Research Service paper shows us, did you notice there was a lot of mays in there? This may apply. This could. There's a lot of qualifiers. Because, as it points out, this has not been tested too much in 150 years. And now the reporting today by CNN, NBC, and others, one of the main points was that Chief Justice John Roberts, a conservative appointed by George W. Bush, seemed pretty skeptical in his line of questioning today. And Roberts, while certainly a conservative, may be perhaps the only conservative swing voter left on the bench. He has crossed over and joined with the liberal justices more than once. Not as swingy as former Justice Kennedy, a conservative who was the swing vote on a lot of issues like marriage equality. But Roberts, I think, is a guy who still has somewhere within himself, he's still concerned about the legacy of his court being the Chief Justice. I think that's important to him. And that might be the wrong reason, a narcissistic, self-serving reason. Well, I don't want people to think I'm an idiot. But I think that's why he swings with the liberals once in a while. But on this one, according to reports, it appears probably not going to do so. What are your thoughts? 844-967-2789, 844-967-2789. Would love to hear from you in terms of this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Any guesses to what the current iteration of the U.S. Supreme Court may decide? 844-967-2789, 844-967-2789.
I think that the Supreme Court's ruling depends on whether or not Clarence Thomas has been on any fishing trips this year.
Well, that could be. We know he has.
Well, depending on who he went on those fishing trips with, I guess.
Right. Off the text line, Andrew from Maine, listening in on WAUK, says, new question. If the president pardons individuals convicted for their participation in January 6, 2021, would that qualify as providing aid and comfort to the enemies of the U.S., or would they no longer be considered enemies because they were pardoned?
That is an excellent question, and that just brings us further confusion and proof that Donald Trump destroys everything he touches, including the U.S. legal system.
Might be going a bit far, but yes, I still agree that anything he touches dies. I mean, that's the Rick Wilson quote, right? But it's a wonderful question from Andrew. And look, I'm not an attorney, so I don't really feel qualified to get too deep into the weeds here. I could give you perhaps an opinion, having read this congressional research paper and my limited work in a law firm and in Congress. I think, again, it would be a question that would have to go to whatever iteration of the United States Supreme Court sits at the time that it would happen. This question. Let's say Trump was elected again, and that he pardoned everyone who was in J6. Well, then you could take that to the Supreme Court, but it depends on the makeup. I mean, they're saying, right? There are rumors within conservative circles that if Trump were reelected, that you could have Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, two of the older members of the court, step down and retire, giving Trump the ability to appoint two more members of the court. And of course, we know the U.S. Senate is about 50-50. If there were a Republican U.S. Senate, Trump could get two more members on the Supreme Court. This is why presidential elections matter. Not just the person in office, but the power that they have beyond that. We'll come back, take your calls after this. 844-967-2789. 844-967-2789. It's the All Ball Show on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Save a horse, ride a cowboy. Everybody says, save a horse, ride a cowboy.
Welcome back to the Todd Ball Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. It is now 10 before the hour of 1 o'clock. Mr. Summers, what did you dial up?
Money by Pink Floyd.
Oh, is that what yeah, see, I don't know my Pink Floyd like I should. I maybe know more Pink than I know Pink Floyd.
Fair enough.
I did know Floyd. He was one of my professors in college, the great late Floyd Blackmore. Anyway, welcome back to the program. Glad to have you along off the text line here. Mr. Sommers, if we can move that up just a tad. This is Gizmo listening in, and Gizmo says this, quote, Trump will self-destruct before he gets to the ballot in November. Either that or he'll be convicted. There's no way he will get elected. Even if he did make it to the ballot, he doesn't have the numbers. He's only in the news because he's such a simpleton, unquote. That is Gizmo on the text line. Remember, you can text us on the Civic Media app. You can download it to your Apple or Android device. Gizmo, I appreciate the take. I respect it, but I do respectfully disagree with it. I think, well, number one, we know that Trump could get convicted. He could get convicted in these 91 indictments he has. He could be sitting in jail behind bars and still get the Republican nomination, which, by the way, I believe he would. And he could still be elected president. So that could happen. And to your point about even if he doesn't, you don't think there's any way he can get elected, I respect that take, but I would say that the numbers say otherwise.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I would have agreed with you saying this same kind of thing in 2015, 2016, but then I, like many others, was proven wrong.
Also off the text line in Middleton, listening to us here on WMDX in Dane County, Matt in Middleton says there is plenty of evidence to prove Trump has engaged in an insurrection. If the court rules in his favor, it is further proof we have an unequal justice system, unquote. Matt from Middleton. Appreciate the take, Matt. I mean, again, I'm not a legal scholar, and I had a couple of actual legal scholars I reached out to, but they weren't able to join us. I will try to do that on a future show because I think it would be interesting. Someone who truly is, a legal scholar on this. There are people out there that are experts in all kinds of niche things, and there are experts in constitutional law.
Right.
I would be interested from a nonpartisan constitutional law scholar take what they feel on this. I just want the law to be applied fairly in this instance. Well, always, but in this instance in particular. Also off the text line here, Steve from Milwaukee listening to WAUK. Matt is absolutely correct, referring to Matt from Middleton there, saying that there is all kinds of proof that Trump engaged in insurrection. Well, that part I agree with 100%, right? I mean, the nonpartisan January 6th commission found evidence, reported evidence, showed us evidence in primetime television that Donald Trump not only took part of, but was responsible for starting the insurrection. So that part to me is indisputable. My take. 844-967-2789, 844-967-2789. Would love to have you call in and give us your take as well. Mr. Zommers played there on the way out the "Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy" song, and it brings up. It wasn't Jeff Perry. What did Jeff Perry say? He wrote it on the YouTube or the.
So yes, we were talking about Cowboys for Trump, and so on Facebook, Jeff Perry said, "I'm founding Cowboys for Todd."
This is fantastic. This may be, and then it just goes to prove what I've always known. Jeff Perry and I have known each other since grade school. There is no off on the genius switch of Jeff Perry. He's always on, you understand?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Cowboys for Todd. And funny because a friend of mine and I were talking about this just this week. Not Cowboys for Todd, but did you ever watch James Corden on CBS, The Late Late Show?
I did not.
All right. It's a great program. James Corden from the UK, and he came over here to do this great show, The Late Late Show. And they had a bit that they would do occasionally on the show called Late Late Live Tinder. And they would choose a member of their staff who was single, and then they would go in the studio audience and they would find people who were single that, were the same, I guess you would say, sexuality as the staff member. And then people they thought might match up, and they had them go backstage, and then they would bring them out one at a time, and they'd stand in they made like a cardboard or a plywood cutout of a phone, and they'd stand like in the screen, and then the staffer would ask them questions, and he or she had a big foam finger, and then she'd swipe right if they wanted the person to sit down and be in a final, or swipe left and they fall like in a pit of balls, like plastic balls or whatever.
That's a really good bit. That's
I know,
funny.
right? Late live Tinder. And then at the end, then the staffer would have 3 people to choose from, and the staffer would choose, and then Corden would send them out and buy a date for him for the rest of the show, and they get to know each other. And then at the end, it was kind of like Love Connection, Chuck Woolery. At the end, then James Corden would say, "Do we have a match here? Do you want to go on another date?" Usually they did, but occasionally, no, not really. But it was a fantastic bit. So I was talking to this friend of mine, and I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to do like a live version of Grindr? It's a different version of Grind My Gears.
So are we going back on the train of renaming the show to Nooner with Todd?
Right? Well, we have an extra hour to fill for a while. So maybe the first Nooner was Todd. And so, we just find, eligible, men here from now or wherever. And then we just have live Grindr, and I interview them, and then I decide, and then we could cover this, and we can what's the date like with Todd? What do you think?
Is this an abuse of your power?
How is it an abuse of power?
I don't know. I think it would be.
Would it be self-serving, perhaps to a point? But I think it would be wildly entertaining.
Oh yes, I completely agree. I think it would be very entertaining. I think it'd be funny. I think
grinding with
I think
Todd.
we might have to do it.
Grinding with Todd. Live Grindr. I don't know. We'll see. We have an extra hour to fill for at least 3 weeks here. So just trying to think of ideas, things out of the box. I thought that was a fantastic idea.
I think so too. And to
Mr. Perry's point, Cowboys for Todd could go along with that. We could do this show. We could do this show like from Texas or Colorado. I kind of have a thing for cowboys, if you want to know the truth.
All my exes live in Texas.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I have any in Texas. Anyway, yes, it was a bit self-serving. Somebody texted from Wausau or from Wanakee saying, not excited about Rider Cowboy. All right, fine. They don't like that. Well, I didn't say we were going to do that. There you go. A great song, by the way. A great old country song. We'll be back with hour 2 of The Other Side. Don't go anywhere. It's the Todd Albaugh Show on Civic Media.